Excellent. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 8th, 2022 Winchester Planning Board meeting. We are being recorded both on Zoom and by WinCam. Thank you very much, WinCam. We have with us Nancy Polcari, our recording secretary, Brian Zucchelli, town planner, and we have a full full. We are in full attendance on the planning board, and I'd like to call out your names and just say present, please, so everyone knows you're there. Sally Dale.
Present.
Thank you. Eaching Scott.
Present.
Cheryl Wolf.
Present.
And Kurt Spring.
Present.
And I am Dave Jerris, current planning board chair. As always, we welcome your input. If you want to email us at planningboard@winchester.us, and that email goes to the entire board as well as to the town planner, Brian Zucchelli. We will also be joined, we also have with us Brian Mantor, assistant town engineer, and we will be joined by town attorney Mina Macarius around 7:30. So this evening we are going to continue our hearing on 10 Converse Place. And when we left off last week, we had just finished, we were going through consultants' reports, and the board was going through their concerns and questions of those consultants. We had, unfortunately, I made the mistake of not including the sustainability director in the list of people who would be before us, and he did submit a report to the board. It is actually a little out of date at the moment. There have been some evolution in the sustainability aspects of this design, and he is meeting with the developers tomorrow, and he will bring us a more up-to-date report next week. So we won't have him with us this evening. We do have, I have notes. What do I do with my notes? There we are. So this evening we have engineering. We still haven't heard from our town's engineering on their report. We did a couple of weeks ago, the planning board submitted a series of questions to the developers at Meliora, and they have submitted a written response. And we want to make sure that the board has a chance to follow up on that this evening. And we also received today a list of possible conditions from the board's design consultant, Philip Chen, and we will be going over that. And after that, we will be beginning the deliberation process, and we will start working through the criteria for the special permit. So why don't we start off with engineering? And Brian, are you Brian Mantor, assistant town engineer? If you want to take over.
Good evening, everyone. The engineering department reviewed the application for a special permit. Memo was drafted on December 2nd, 2021. The documents reviewed were the plans developed by at AD Meliora, Gillespie and Company, Copley Wolf Design, Howard Design, Hudson and Beals Associates, along with their associated appendices. And the general note, the department came up with several comments, many comments, and since the writing of the memo, the design has gone through significant, a fair amount of revisions and discussion. So some of the comments have already been addressed, such as the wound earth. But then the developer has taken a look at the memo and has addressed or acknowledged all the comments in a positive fashion, that they have the ability to address them or work through them with the engineering department in the upcoming months if the permit is issued.
Okay, thank you. So I want to open it up to the board, and I just want to really briefly, so are there any outstanding concerns that you have, or do you feel that all of your concerns have been responded to sufficiently?
I think everything has been responded to sufficiently at this time, knowing that the development team will be working with the engineering department to more fully flesh out the details of a comment. But they are aware of all the issues and concerns that we have with site, laying out the site with respect to all the construction and the site constraints with parking on Mount Vernon Street and Washington Street and the Converse Place. So I think that the development team is ready and willing to engage the engineering department to fully flesh out our concerns or observations.
Okay, great. And then I will shut up and let the planning board go ahead. You folks have any questions? Wow. Okay. Going once, going twice. Brian is almost off the hot seat. Brian's off the hot seat. Okay, thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it. So our next order of business is, as I mentioned, the planning board did send out a long list of questions to add an earlier to developers. Brian, would you pop up that list so that this is in the public record? I just want to have it up on the screen, and so I don't know that we'll be going through every single one of these. I think the question, in order to make this most efficient, if the board has any follow-ups they want to make to the responses, or if they have any new questions have sparked, although please be reasonable with them considering that we'd like to move forward efficiently. So why don't we go around the board? I know, Sally, you asked quite a few questions. Are you satisfied with the response that you got?
Yeah, I mean, I'm satisfied to the extent that what I understand is that an enormous amount of information will come to us when we move to the next phase of the project, so that whatever we're deciding in this stage of the project has a lot of contingencies, and I guess they would be classified as conditions.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. So that's how it is.
Yeah, Brian, not to put you on the spot, but could you provide a little more information on the next phase of this project after, assuming that this project is approved, the special permit is approved, how would you lay out what would come next?
To be honest, I would defer that to the design team. Once the design team, meaning the applicant, determines the next step, their next step, that would obviously have to feed into any type of building permit well over 1 to 2 years from now. That in terms of construction management, like Brian Manter had said, that's a normal condition. Most of the conditions that were put in place for a 654 Main Street seemed to be reasonable according to our legal counsel.
Russ. Come look at this.
Somebody has their microphone on. If you would please turn it off.
Yeah, I'm not sure who that is, but I can figure that out. But Diab, sorry, back to you.
Okay, thanks. I just there is significant more work that will be done on this project afterwards. So I was hoping you'd have more information than I did, but you're correct. This does go into design and then permitting. Okay, apologize for that
Green area.
segue.
Green area.
Sally, anything further you wanted to make?
Yeah, I
comment
guess
on?
because this is the first really large special permit consideration that I've participated in, I just wanted to know, is it typical in a very large project like this that a lot of the information comes after the special permit is approved?
So
Yeah.
the only thing I can say there is that I think that's probably a better question for Mina Makarios, who has a better understanding of working for a number of different towns. But what I can say is that this is 43 units. 654 Main Street was 36 units, so 7 units less. And these types of conditions for this project are in terms of number of conditions, or these types of things that are answered according to Ad Meliora's response are I'm not going to say exactly in line with 654 Main Street, but it's certainly within the realms of those previous conditions that were approved by legal counsel. But I think it is a better question for Mina, who will join us in about 15 minutes.
That's great. I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Brian, can you scroll up?
Any particular? I'm just.
No, I mean,
Yep.
there are just so many things. So.
So is there any other points in particular, Sally, that you'd like to bring up at the moment?
Well, I guess one of the things that maybe I didn't ask the question, but I'm very grateful to see the amount of attention that's been paid by Tool and the applicant to considerations about Congress Street and, you know, passage through Congress and how to accommodate so many multiple uses. And I guess the one thing that we still don't have, and I know that's coming later, is the having to do with how long it takes to get in and out of the garage. And I believe Tool Design made reference to a 2 to 4 minute cycle, which, you know, that's pretty good. So that might address the concern about backups on Mount Vernon Street. But I think it's really important that we pay very close attention to the way that space is assigned on Converse Street, and I appreciate the amount of attention that's being paid to it.
Yeah, and I just again to note that sort of all of that is within the select board's purview because they are in charge of streets essentially.
They are, but it's within our criteria to address if we think that there's something that has to do with, you know, I forget how do we traffic and circulation and access is the thing we look at.
But yes,
If
I'm just saying
reasonably adequate provisions have been made, right? And it is definitely the select board's purview, but if we didn't think that reasonably adequate provisions have been made, the select board would want to know about it, I assume.
I assume they would as well.
Right.
Yes.
Maybe to this, if it's okay for me just to jump in and piggyback on Steph's question. I mean, so Brian, I don't know if this is a question for you or for you know, maybe for you, yeah, but I mean, if ultimately our conclusion was that, you know, we felt the queuing system and there needed to be a removal of those 3 parallel parking spaces right there to provide appropriate space, if like that was something we felt was important to achieving the traffic and circulation piece that Sally mentioned, but that's not within our purview to make that change, that's the select board. Would we make that a condition, or would we just like how does that process work given it's actually not within our control to make that decision?
Well, we could not make it a condition of the project because we can't ask this, we can't command the select board to do that. So and we can't, I don't believe that we could make it a condition. we could.
So if we felt like that needed to be true, then we'd effectively be saying that we don't think the plan adequately addresses parking circulation as it is.
Typically, I'll just say very quickly, typically the condition is something like to the satisfaction of the town. That's a very typical condition that you see in all types of special permits that this town issues as well as other towns. So something typical would be just that. When you would say to the satisfaction of the town, that means whatever would be necessary to make that happen, meaning if it was select board or conservation or who
Right.
or whoever.
So in the case of those 3 parking spaces on Converse, I have come to understand that every parking space is precious. We all have come to understand that. So taking away 3 is 3 precious spaces. What's been raised to me, and I'm seeing it in conversation also, the correspondence, is concern that people who have access to the automated parking garage will not use it during the day and will use day parking on the street or in the jank slot. And the concern was that those cars would not be using the garage during the day if it's cumbersome or onerous to get in and out. And so that's a concern. And I understand it's being addressed after we get through this step. But I raise it as a concern in connection also with the loss of those 3 spaces. It's a looming parking issue for those 3 spaces and the question of people who live there not parking in the garage during the day.
I think that's a good question. I think that one should also, I think, bear in mind that that site is just a difficult parking. That traffic on 10 Converse will be difficult regardless of the building that's put on that lot. And so I think everyone realizes that's just a horrible setup right now. And I think it's trying to separate what is a problem for the site versus a problem for this project. I mean, I think that something needs to be done there regardless of the number of units on that building, because most any project on that site will have an entrance on 10 Converse rather than Mount Vernon, just because we don't want to have traffic coming in on Mount Vernon. A driveway into a structure on Mount Vernon is against all of our design sensibilities. So this problem on 10 Converse is project independent and site specific. So how it's solved, I think, is probably going to be solved the same way for all projects.
I think one of the things that was brought to my attention, and I don't have the dimensional data to assess its viability, but because the proponent has reduced the number of units to 43, and he's reduced the number of parking spaces to 56, and our requirement is, I believe it's 1-to-1. Is that 1 unit per residence? I mean, one parking space per residence, or is it 1.25?
It's actually 0.75.
0.75. So on a 46 building, what would that be? 30 spaces, 32 spaces?
Yeah, they are exceeding the requirement.
Yes, and in doing so, it has necessitated a higher capacity technology for parking. And a lot of people have said if it was just, because there's no just about it, a ramped underground garage addressing the 0.75 ratio, that would potentially address a lot of the concerns about backup and queuing and staging and so on. So I put that on the table.
Yeah, and the flip side is the fact that if we were to reduce it to just 0.75, then you would have, I think, an equal number of people upset that they are not putting in enough parking on the spot to deal with guests and such. So I think,
and so that's a really interesting point, and it goes to the whole notion of transit-oriented development, which is part of what the PUD is, which is there they're in a town center where there are at least two different modes of public transportation, and the notion that the sort of the lifestyle of the future is no cars, or very much fewer cars per household, and that's where that 0.75 came from back in 2015. And I don't know how to predict, how
I
many
think that,
cars.
yeah, so I think we're kind of, all of this, I think is, I think these are good points. I don't know that we're going to be able to get to a conclusion on that
No,
at
I
this
just want to
stage
put
of the
them on the
project.
table.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about, or any other questions that weren't answered by the response from Ed Miliora, or did they spark any new questions? I Ching, please go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question after Brian went on vacation, but I think that and this might be for the developer and Nina, but the public space, the green space that they're offering to be a private public space, I was wondering how the town can be assured that the proposed space is open to the public and will continue to be so and accessible for as long as the building's existence. And my question, and I've never seen this and it's just ignorance, but what is the legal portion of that? Like what's to prevent the condo association, say, from installing, fences or spiked seating, or even like a audio discomfort or timed access, or, sort of temporary surveillance kind of a thing. I just want to know what tools we have to ensure that everybody's feeling welcome in that space.
Do you have, I think that's a direct question for the applicant to
Yes, I
say what
agree.
they're willing to do. Yeah.
Somebody from Ed Miliora, who's the point person this evening?
It's Ian Gillespie. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I'm the point person. I'm joined by Jan Steenberger, so he'll cut me off where appropriate. But what I've had suggested to us is that and I Ching raises a very good question. It's been on our minds, how to deal with this. So we asked a couple of questions about it. And the answer we got back was that it could be a condition of the permit, and that the space beyond a certain line around the building becomes public. We'd have to work through the area that's directly adjacent to the pond end of the building, because we don't know yet if there's going to be an outdoor patio for, let's say, a cafe there or not. But other than right next to the building, and Jan can correct me, we thought if that were a condition of the permit, then if that were to change in the future, they would have to come back to the planning board for relief. So I'd also put that up to council as an alternative, but that's what we heard. It's a reasonable option. Jan, do you have something on that?
No, except I think any construction in that area, even putting up a fence, would require us to go to conservation and I think planning board and whatnot. I don't think we can just build anything there.
I'm thinking even of not non-built things like, just timed hours, or, security guards, private security guards sort of standing there to sort of, just temporary things.
Yes.
So like what's to assure that we will feel welcome?
I would say put it in the conditions to the satisfaction of the town, and we'll work it out with Brian and the legal department. It's absolutely our intention to make it public, and whatever we need to do to make sure that it is public, we'll do. It's really more what you guys feel most comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I Ching, I would add to that we've also had special interest groups ask us if, it could be used for them, kind of thing. And So we also want to make sure that the public space is in the public domain. And maybe your legal can make that sort of at the direction of the town manager or somebody of that sort. Maybe Brian has an idea, but we'd rather not have it dedicated to a specific interest group.
Mina Makarios just joined, I believe, now that he's only been in for about 40 seconds, we might as well get him involved in the conversation. But the one question now is about the space to the south of the building, in terms of what assurances can the planning board have, or what conditions or what types of conditions could you put on the permit to make sure that that space is considered for the public?
And our suggestion, Mina, had been a condition of the planning of the permit to the benefit of the planning board. They would ride with the property in perpetuity.
Yeah, that's Ian, thank you. And thank you for the brief summary, Brian. I didn't have to answer without the question itself. That absolutely is something that you see as conditions all the time, essentially public space, open space, and to the extent that an easement or a license is necessary. It probably isn't necessary if it's a condition in there as well for this kind of space, but that's right.
And can we make how do we make the town, who is it who is our counterparty? Is it the town manager? Is it select board?
It typically, if you know, typically I would say the town manager. The town manager has the authority over the town's own public space, generally speaking. Right. And so it seems appropriate that would be the town manager or her designee, their designee.
Mina, is there a way to, does it cover the things that aren't built? So I was thinking about sort of audio discomfort, or, timed access, security guards, that kind of stuff. How is that managed within the law or the condition? Well,
you could get more particular on certain conditions like that. When you say how's it managed in the law, it's different for really any different projects, but ones that have a public element could require particular pieces of it. I do think one thing to keep in mind as sort of a zoning piece is how much you can ask for, sort of thinking about it programmatically over time can sometimes be harder if it is something like that, as opposed to the space itself being left open and available to the public, maintained as public space, properly landscaped, et cetera, is easier to enforce later on than sort of what may be changing desires over the years for the town to have maybe different pieces of it.
Okay, thank you.
So if I understand I Ching's question, she's asking about things like, we're speaking of the oval area as well as the banks of the river near the bike path and so on. And she's asking, when you say noise, so for instance, say there was an arts event in town, and the last performance, say it was the Porch Fest, I'm just choosing something, and the last performance was at 9:30, right? Would that be so late that the residents would say, no, the Porch Fest can't perform here after 8 p.m. and that would be like negotiated? It wouldn't be in the conditions, it would be negotiated as part of the relationship between the condominium association and the town. Does it come down to those kind of specific event-specific parameters for the use of that space?
Typically, what we've seen when there's sort of been a joint public space that's dedicated to town use, and certainly welcome the applicant's views on what they've done elsewhere, is something like that, Sally. Later on, because you want it to be flexible enough that it doesn't come back to the planning board for a revision of a permit, which is not really the appropriate place for a minor revision. you could make the condition broad enough to say, for instance, and I don't want to draft on the spot here, but under the supervision of the town manager, subject to such terms as and conditions as agreeable regarding those kind of issues.
Right.
And you sort of have a policy around it afterwards about how it's used. But it's sort of trying to balance the public interest in using the space with the private rights of the residents nearby.
Right. So it's a combination of a condition and then a policy adopted by the appropriate board. And it sounds like it probably would be the select board.
Select board or the manager themselves, right?
Yeah, that's great. All right.
I just want to mention, if I could please, that as we look at this slide, the land actually along the water is owned by the town. So we will maintain that. And we've agreed with, we presented to the select board that we would do that. And the Aberjona initiative for the 25 feet down to the water. So, and that we would take care of that space as well.
I had a question about the east side of the building and the open space. Diab, is that acceptable?
Yeah, I was just wondering, did you want to ask Mina your previous question about, I think we were talking about phasing and what come while we have Mina on the spot?
Me? I don't remember asking a question about phasing. I'm sorry. What was the?
Okay, I'm sorry. There was something that we thought was appropriate to ask of Mina from our previous conversation.
Ellie, I think it was your question about the timing of like learning a lot of information after we make our vote, and like, is that
Yes,
traditional?
thank you. Yeah, it was the question of, there's a lot of things in the responses that say, we're going to know more about this after you approve the permit. We're going to know more about this after you approve the permit. So it's like, it's sort of a little bit of go on good faith and make sure our conditions are articulate enough or tight enough that we get our answers questioned that a condition would be that our questions are answered to our satisfaction. I don't know how you do that. So you can see each of these. I don't know. Let me see.
Brian, do you want to pop up that list again, please? So Mina, there, just as a little bit of background, so we submitted a bunch of questions to Admiliora, and a lot of the responses are saying this is part of the design phase rather than the permitting phase. Or I should say it's the post permit approval phase, I guess you'd call it.
Before the building permit, they get the special permit to
thank
proceed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of these answers said, and maybe Brian can just scroll up and down because I couldn't find my printed copy right away, but a lot of them say will be handled in the design phase. Oh, see here, like number 5, forthcoming during the design phase. And that phrase or that general message is pretty consistently reflected through all these answers. And one question I had is that typical, or do proponents of major projects like this, are they expected to answer these questions before the design phase? That's simply for my education. And then can we make sure that we write the conditions in such a way that what they do provide in the design phase, if it's not what we wanted, they got to fix it. I don't know how to.
Yeah. Diab, I'm happy to try to answer that now if that's appropriate. Sally, taking your questions in sort of in parts. Yes, it is common to have that sort of distinction, and there's inevitably with any project of this complexity or this size going to have to be design choices, final building pieces, and it isn't necessarily the same as the permit requirements that the board is signing off on. And so I guess I would phrase it a little bit as in than to say that you take it on good faith. You take it as having set the parameters that would meet the zoning bylaws requirements. And once you're in there, the developer, designer, architect, et cetera, have some ability to design, right? It's private property, and they have some ability to design on that front. To the extent that you then want to make sure that the expectations were met within the right parameters, and I'm sort of paraphrasing one of the ones that was on the screen before, the lighting design, right? It says it will comply with the dark sky guidelines. The idea of a well-written condition is the building inspector, and if necessary in consultation with other staff or us, can look at it, look at what was built or what was designed and say, yes, this, I know what this condition means, and I know that it's met. And then the building permit, either a certificate of occupancy should issue or a building permit should issue, sort of depending on when in the process that condition is supposed to be met. That doesn't, so that's fairly typical. And so you want the conditions to be specific enough, while obviously leaving enough, the construction takes a while, and it's completely appropriate to do that. It's not the role of the board to design every feature, but it is a report to make sure that the guidelines are met.
Right, and so you raise a good point that the question and answer document doesn't necessarily have everything in it that would be a driver of a condition. Like, say we said that we wanted to have a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 bicycle parking ratio in the building. And if they didn't do that, would we say shut down the job? No, that's not a good way to run a railroad. So it's having really well-written conditions that are well considered and voted on is the way that you proceed. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah,
Good.
Correct. But obviously reasonable and guided by what the guidelines permit too. So.
Correct. Yes. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So.
Let me try that again. Thank you, Mina. As usual, very useful advice. So I think that underscores that one of the things that we are going to be working through is what are the conditions that we want applied. And while we may not get the wording exactly right, that's what Brian and Mina are there for in order to help us get it there. So I think we already have a good one from I Ching about maintaining public access to the shared public space. And so we don't have to come up with the exact words, but we know something like that will be in there. So are there any other questions for the Ad Meliora team? If not, then I would like we do have something that our consultant Philip Chen from Ambeha Associates sent us today, which is his a short list of his considerations for conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian, if you want to pop that up.
You're not seeing it?
Oh, well, yes, now we are.
Okay.
And if you scroll up to the top, I think. Okay, there we go. Now it's official. Oh, I apologize. It's Ambeha Architects, not Associates. My apologies. And if you scroll up, we can take a look at some of those conditions. So I think the idea is that we would be looking at more programmatic an investigation and how you could program that space.
So, Philip Chen is here, by the way, just
Oh, okay.
so, but
Yeah, so why don't we open the floor to, sorry, Philip, I did not see you.
That's okay. Good evening, all.
Are there any questions of Mr. Chen from the board?
The only thing I would just say, just in kind of a brief summary, is that it seemed like these seemed to be aspects that were either late or less developed, like the oval, like the pedestrian circulation. As we saw the landscape plan toward the end of the conceptual presentation. Materials, I think we all agreed would be developed again. And, it's one of those aspects that would be developed as the design progresses. Same thing with the screening at the mechanical penthouse. So I just listed some things that seemed like they needed still a little bit more definition as we got to the end of the conceptual design presentations.
Yeah, so one of the things that we might add to the materials is that they provide, I forget what it's called, you build out a fake wall with materials or something like that, a design wall.
the test wall is in one of
Test
that's in the
wall.
response. It's in the
developer's
response.
I have
Yeah.
a question about Philip's assessment on pedestrian circulation. Can I jump to that, Diab?
Yeah, sure.
So he says in his second bolded paragraph that the project proposes a multi-use path for the site that's available for bikers or pedestrians, and that the width of the path should be sufficient for its intended use, and there should be sufficient space to accommodate the proposed uses on the east side of the site. And what I remember hearing from our last meeting was that where the path squeezes between the willow tree and the east side of the building, where those live work units are, the path has to squeeze from 8 feet, from 11 feet down to 8 feet. And again, I don't know the design standards for what's called a multimodal path, where you have bicycles, but you still have room for people to walk and not get run over. But it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room here. It seems like it's a really tight space. And this is one of the concerns I have when I talk about wanting to reduce the width of the building, is that I want to make sure, because the Tri-Community Bike Path was many years in the making, and it was a really difficult thing to find a way through Winchester. And everyone knows that where it does go through Winchester, it has a lot of twists and turns and narrowings, and it's an opportunity for us to address any shortcomings where on this particular segment of the path, if we pay attention to that.
So I guess there's a condition in there somewhere. I don't mean to make that sounds all horrible. I didn't mean to belittle what you're saying. There's a condition that we should try to come to. And I'm not sure what it should be.
What I would suggest is, Philip or Mr. Chen basically said it here, and the way to make it to what you're talking about, Sally, would be to the satisfaction of the town's consultant in this particular case, tool design, and because this is a public multi-use path that is involving the manager or the manager's office or the select board. So you would say to the town's consultant and the town's satisfaction.
Well, and I would say, because the Traffic and Transportation Advisory Committee reports to the select board, that I would like to know if they would weigh in on recommendations for any changes to the design that would make the bike path, where it curves around, what is that, this northeast corner of the pond, if I have it right, it provides sufficient space for safety of both bicycles and pedestrians, instead of using the word or.
Yeah, so what Mina and I are going to be doing is, as much as possible, is putting together um, the thoughts of this evening, as well as the comments and from the response document that they've already committed to put it all into one one document. So I think I have the information I need regarding that for the pedestrian circulation.
Yeah, and Sally, I think that if the condition is clear enough, we don't need to, we simply have to say it needs to be sufficient, and it's up to them to come up with a design which makes it so.
Right. And my point would be that it needs to be sufficient for simultaneous use. I heard in public comment and even in our meeting discussion that bikers would end up having to get off their bikes and walk because there would be strollers and pedestrians, and you don't want people careening into people. So making it a safe, it obviates it's this section as a bike path. It becomes more of a walking.
Well, I have on occasion been known to ride down the Minuteman, and I can tell you that as wide as it is, if you've got 3 people and 3 strollers walking 3 dogs all at the same time, it doesn't matter how wide you make it, especially if the dogs are on those extendable leashes. I think there is people tend to use as much room as you give them.
Well, I think I was concerned about the narrowing from 11 to 8 feet, to be
Yeah,
very specific.
I think that we should
I would like to see that addressed.
Yeah,
and not to the detriment of the willow tree.
Yes.
Hey guys, I thought tool design, I thought they made the comment last week that 10 feet was like standard and appropriate width to satisfy. That was my recollection, that they weighed in and did say that she thought that was appropriate. It was 10
Yeah,
feet.
and we don't have 10 feet at that point. We have 8.
Right. So it sounds like, Sally, at least in your view, that would be a condition, right?
Right.
Want to make sure
we
that
have to fix it.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll put that, we can have that in as a condition, and the exact numbers don't matter. It's up to the experts to put in there. We just want it to be done right. Okay. Any other comments on this? I mean, the only thing that I would love to see, I love the idea of the open space and developing the programming of that space. I would love to see, for instance, that we include the Cultural Council in that discussion, so that because we want to broaden the concept of what could be possible there.
I agree with that, Diab. They're a major player in the programming of this wonderful new open space in our town.
Right.
This is about placemaking, and the Cultural Council is about space enlivening. So it's great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to make the distinction between the cultural council and the cultural district, and it's actually both. But I believe I think you might be talking about the cultural district.
I think so too.
But they are both important. I just
someone with more culture than I have. How's that?
The difference being that one is a funding authority and one is a programming authority, right?
Well,
Brian?
I think the key thing I'd like to see in this condition would be the appropriate language, so that the appropriate people are engaged, regardless. So my imagination may not be broad enough to encompass everyone we want to weigh in on this. So,
right, good.
Okay. And if there are any other comments on this? If not, then I think we are ready to move on. Again, we will be having comments from the sustainability director next week with an update on his report to us. So at this point, we are ready, I believe, to start our deliberations. And so there are a few comments I'd like to make before we start. I know that this is an incredibly important project to a lot of people in town. I think it's safe to say that this project has been the most closely watched by our community of any that has come before the planning board in recent memory. And of course, I exclude our comprehensive master plan, which we had a lot of input in. I think we all recognize that 10 Converse Place is at the heart of our town center in a special location on the Mill Pond, and that its development requires care, vision, and humility. This project has been before this board in several incarnations for at least a couple of years, with a hiatus between the spring of 2020 and the fall of 2021. It has gone through considerable pre-application review, I think more than any other project in town perhaps, as well as reviews subsequent to its submission for special permit in September of last year. We've had reviews that have been performed by this board and other town entities, including Design Review, Historical Housing Partnership, the town planner, the town sustainability director, town engineering, the board's own design consultants, Dennis Carlone and Philip Chen, as well as traffic and stormwater by Tool and VHB. And I'm sure I've forgotten someone, and I apologize. So as we move forward, and this is, I think it's important for the entire community to realize that the board is bound by our zoning laws, and those bylaws, they provide a path to mediating between the needs and rights of our community and the needs and rights of the property owner. And those do not necessarily align, but they are also not necessarily in opposition. And it's our board which has to help mediate that. So we do have the responsibility to weigh all of the various interests, and our decision must be balanced across all of the criteria that the zoning bylaws mandate be considered. Our decision is informed by the input from our town's committees, our consultants, and the town planner and sustainability director, each of whom advises us in their areas of expertise, and they are very much expert. We are responsible for taking those sometimes contradictory opinions and advice and constructing a decision which we believe is in the best interests of our community. I know that each of my fellow board members cares deeply about the future of this community and that their decision will be rooted in that care. However, regardless of how we decide, I know that there will be those who are disappointed. And I want to note that this will not be an easy decision. And I ask the community to respect the time and the effort the planning board members have put into reviewing, questioning, and understanding all facets of this development. And you may disagree with the outcome, but please never doubt the integrity and commitment to this board. So with that sort of soapbox speech out of the way, we come before us. I think the first part is we are going to start looking at special permit criteria. And we are here because they are seeking to build under the Planned Unit Development Overlay District. This district was created when the Center Business Zoning was approved by town meeting in 2015 by the, at the time, 2/3 vote required. And as we go forward from those bylaws, the purpose of the PUD is to encourage and facilitate the development of new mixed-use developments, especially those incorporating a substantial number of housing units within the CBD. The PUD is intended to ensure coordination and flexibility in design and review through a careful, controlled process for evaluating specific plans rather than through the application of fixed regulations. It is expected that any residential component within a PUD will provide a diversity of housing types, rental and condo, price points, and sizes to accommodate a wide range of ages and economic levels. In particular, this development seeks a maximum floor area ratio, FAR, of 3.0, which is permitted in the PUD overlay district. Quote, if the construction of the development references and clearly meets the goals and objectives of the CBD by offering more diverse housing opportunities which address the population needs of the Winchester community. When the board is considering the special permit, and again, I read from the bylaws, a special permit may be granted by the special permit granting authority only if it finds that the beneficial aspects of the proposed use or structure will outweigh its adverse effects on the town or the neighborhood in view of the particular characteristics of the site and of the proposal in relation to that site. And we are authorized to grant permits with conditions. Such permits may be granted with such reasonable conditions, safeguards, or limitations on time or use, including performance guarantees, as the special permit granting authority may deem necessary to serve the purposes of this bylaw. We are at the same time going through site plan and design review because this project does fall under those criteria. We are to do that concurrently, which we have done. Site plan review requires that the board, quote, determine that reasonably adequate provisions have been made by the applicant to meet the criteria listed in the bylaws. And design review, and I'm not quoting here, I'm just stating, informs the board as to whether the project has met criteria in the special permit and site plan reviews, but it does not itself include any sort of determination by the board. So we are not going to be ruling on design guidelines. We will be using those for our determination of the other criteria. And one of the questions that I was hoping I could get town council to answer is, one of the things that has come up is, when we consider this project, can we also consider alternative designs, in the sense that we might say, we think there's a better design, therefore we shall vote against this, or we might say that the alternative design is worse than this one for some reason, let's say because it will not get rid of the laundry building, and we want the laundry building gone because we want that public space. So if town council could give us sort of a feeling as whether the board can take into account alternative scenarios in our decision, I'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Diab. I think the short answer is, well, I can't say what's in anyone's mind when they think about a decision. I think about this, about the legal standard if this were before a court after you make your decision. And in either case, a court likely would ignore evidence about what else could have been built, with one limited sort of exception that I'll explain. What a court would look at is, does this meet the criteria in your zoning bylaw as proposed, the project as proposed? And to the extent that part of someone's decision in favor of it is, well, I prefer this to some other thing that I might think could have been built, that certainly could be in someone's viewpoint, but a court isn't going to be persuaded by that if there's an abutter challenge, for instance. And the inverse is true. A denial based on, I think you could have done better, you met the standards, but you could have done better, is not appropriate. It would have to be, if the standards are met, the standards are met. Where it may come into account is if an applicant, excuse me, is suggesting that they could not meet standards, or there was no feasible way to meet standards, but an alternative was shown to meet that standards, that sort of counterfactual is sometimes used as evidence of, well, it's not an unreasonable standard to have in the bylaw in the first place. But assuming we're talking about a bylaw where there's no disagreement that the standards are attainable, you really should be looking at the project versus the standards, not what else could have been there. This kind of comes back to my point earlier that you're here as a quasi-adjudicatory body rather than in a design capacity, designing for what you or I might have wanted ourselves to build.
Which
Okay.
is to say, we're not writing the law, we're interpreting the law and judging the compliance of the project with the law. Is that what you're saying, Mina?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. That answered my question. While we've got you on the spot, before we begin are going through all of them, are there any other questions for Mina? I mean,
Well, I have one, Mina. In section 942, our special permit criteria, the number 10 says that, or excuse me, number 11 says that, so we're supposed to find that the beneficial impacts outweigh adverse impacts. No, excuse me. It's in site plan review. Site plan review, and it says consistency with design guidelines. But what I heard Diab talking.
Sorry, I'm sorry. What section are you at, so I can get to the right section?
I'm very sorry, Brian. I jumped because I was looking at the wrong thing. It's 7.3.15.5 general standards for site plan review. And I heard something in the conversation just a little bit ago regarding number 11, which is consistency with design review guidelines. And Diab, can you repeat what you said earlier, that we're not here to judge consistency with design review guidelines?
No, I didn't say that. What I said was that the design review guidelines themselves do not call out for a decision by the board, but that they are used as input to the criteria in the special permit and in the site plan review. So the site plan review explicitly calls out action by the board. It explicitly says you must meet these things. And one of the things it says is you must meet consistency with design review guidelines. But the guidelines themselves are not, we don't make a decision. The guidelines themselves do not call out a decision by the board. The decisions are made only under the site plan review and the site plan and the special permit. And I probably confused the issue in part.
Yeah, I don't actually understand what you said. What I see is that we are to determine that reasonably adequate provisions have been made by the applicant to be consistent with design review guidelines.
Yeah, and I apologize. The reason I said that was because section 7315 combines site plan and design review.
Right.
And as I was going through here, I probably I did not mean to say we were not going to be making decisions. I was trying to make things easy and I messed up. So I made it more complicated. So yes, they are included in their site plan review.
Right. Right.
Sorry.
So for instance, if we determined that even though there was an attempt at reasonably adequate provisions being made to be consistent with design review guidelines, if we determined that the adequate provisions had not been made, that would be a point to note.
Yes, that would mean that there's a knock against it under site plan review. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to understand that. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
No. It's clarifying.
Okay. So any other questions of Mina before we begin the process? If not, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go right through our special permit, because I think that's the one that we have to go through both of them, and special permit is the big one, I believe, because let's go, Brian, if you could pull up section 942. And so we have until 9 o'clock this evening for this. Then we will be going into executive session for personnel issues, or it sounds horrible, to finally get the board done with our review of the town planner, and then we will pick it up at our next meeting next week. So Brian, thank you. Okay, so again, as a reminder, we are going to be looking at each of these, and we will be talking about what are each member of the board will have the opportunity to make a brief statement as how they feel about this. I'd like it to keep it pretty short, so if you can do it within 90 seconds, that would be great. And so we're looking at the beneficial impacts, the negative impacts, and if there is some sort of remediation, which is possible through a condition. Not all of these will avail themselves to that sort of process. So for instance, number one, community needs, which are served by the proposal. Presumably there are all positive impacts for community needs. So why don't I, if the board wants to go through, and why don't we do this in reverse alphabetical order so we know how people are going through, and now we have to figure out what the alphabet looks like. So I think Cheryl, you're up first. Then comes I Ching. No, sorry. Then comes Kurt. If I'm going to go by your last name, for some reason I chose that. So it's Cheryl, Kurt, I Ching. No, Jarius. Sorry, I don't know my alphabet. Jarius, Scott. No, I'm sorry. Cheryl. I had this all sorted out beforehand. Cheryl, Kurt, I Ching, Jarius, Dale, if we do it in reverse alphabetical order. Okay, sorry for that confusion. So we're looking at number 1 now, which is community needs. And Cheryl, would you like to go first?
Certainly. So it's too bad you took the, we're just, in regards to the community needs, I think that we've seen that this project fulfills the need for housing. And it fulfills it in a way that we've reviewed both for diversity, and we've seen that that John Sevier and his group are also behind this project. I think that that's the number one way in which this building should be, it should be commended for fulfilling that community need. And I hold that up as probably the most important aspect of the granting, how it serves the first criteria. I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail because we're not going to talk, there's so many of us, it's probably just best to say what's most important for each of us in terms of that community piece.
Okay, thank you. Kurt?
Yep. In the interest of time, I'll say ditto on the housing piece that Cheryl just described. I would just add a couple maybe other quick ones, which are, economic vitality and vibrancy downtown, adding some additional retail space. I think that's definitely a community benefit. I frankly think the creation of that public space on Mill Pond, getting rid of the existing laundry building, which really encroaches upon it, in my opinion, provides a nice public benefit. And I also think it's important to note that this project exceeds the required parking requirement and does it in a way that is frankly very, very costly for a developer to build parking underground here. So, I think the fact that this plan includes, parking in excess of what is required in a way that, isn't putting a parking deck visible in downtown, which I frankly don't think people would like either, is a community benefit.
Okay, thank you. I Ching.
I would echo the housing as the most important criteria here, including the diversity of it, the number of it, as well as its location. The transit-oriented aspect of it is something that, the 2015 bylaws were trying to address. So that I feel like is going to be a leading project to get us there. And I also think that the way that the building is trying for its building maintenance and continuation of it in a sustainable way is something that our community, I think, has been advocating for. And I think it's a good example of that.
Okay, thank you. Apparently I go next, and I want to echo, I think, what everyone has said so far. I'm for me, one of the biggest points is housing. It's also that the returning or the providing public access to Mill Pond in a way which I don't think is possible right now. And I think the Housing Partnership Board's analysis of the housing needs and the fact that a 3-bedroom unit is going to be affordable, as is one of the work live units, is also, I think, is really important part of this this design. Sally?
So I totally agree that adding affordable units to the town is really important. As everybody knows, in the game of numerator and denominator, when you're talking about a condominium building as opposed to a rental building, the numerator's on top. The denominator grows. more than the numerator does with condos. And so anything that can be done to provide more than the required number of affordable units as a percentage of the total number of units in the building, to me, increases the degree to which it serves the needs of the community. So I put that on the table as a question as to whether there are further discussions that can be had about increasing the number of affordable units within the building. I also will say that I don't think that the robotic parking garage, and I know I'm harping again, but it's because this is a point that I was making in this concept. I'm not sure that robotic parking serves the needs of the community. It remains to be seen. Similarly, the bike path design remains to be seen because that's a really important community asset. And I did make oblique reference to interior bike space for residents, but also exterior bikes parking space for the community. I'm not sure those have been specified, so that would perhaps be a condition. And the only other thing that I would say is that right now the building blocks a significant view of the mill pond from Mount Vernon. And if the building were narrower, more views would be less blocked than they are right now. And that is a major asset of the town, is the view shed to the mill pond. So I would say it's great that it has affordable housing. I'd love to see more. I'd love to see more information on the parking impacts of robotic parking. I'm really hoping we can make the bike path workable at full width. I'm really hoping that we can provide interior and exterior bike parking that would help everybody. And I'm really hoping that we can narrow the footprint of the building so that we have bike views, watershed views that right now are lost or proposed to be lost.
Okay, thank you. I think you've kind of segued us right into number 2 there, Sally, because we're talking about traffic flow and safety, and I would think that pedestrian and bicycling would go under that. So perfect work there. Why don't we, so at this point, we will be looking, I think it's, since we are, we're going to have negative and positive impacts here. We can also talk about conditions as well. Kurt, no, who goes first? Cheryl?
I do. Yep.
Go ahead, please.
So I think traffic flow, similar to, our last approval of, sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the Main Street project, but that there's always work to be done as we go into schematic design and design development. But I do like what we've read so far from Tool, the amount of detail that's in that, and the way that Converse is going to come to life, and that whole part of Mount Vernon is now going to feel as though it's a part of downtown Winchester, which it has not felt. You kind of get to that point and you're at the fire station and it's kind of over unless you get yourself all the way to town hall. I also feel that that the bike path is a new kind of traffic, a new kind of area to consider. And I would say, I think we do need to have some conditions associated with the bike path. But I would say, because I am a biker, that unlike the Minuteman Trail, which is a straightaway, this is a winding path. And I think that slows people down. But we do want to make sure that the residential entries and the bike path and the public amenity all go well together. And I'd also like to say that I don't believe that we've talked a lot about downtown parking except earlier on. And I think that that's a much bigger egg, much bigger nut to crack. And I think we're working towards that. I just feel as though this building is not, and this program with residential, with housing near a public commuting rail is not going to, I think it's going to improve the way that we live. And I think parking downtown will be taken care of as we get deeper into understanding other solutions for downtown. I don't think this is a deal breaker for solving the problems of parking downtown. Time up.
Thank you. You set your own timer.
No, I didn't. I need to turn my phone off. Sorry.
Cheryl, can I ask a follow-up question, Cheryl? When you said that it's not a deal breaker, do you mean that that it can be solved, that it's just keep it on the table to address it, but don't throw out the whole project because of the complexities of downtown parking? It's not.
I don't think the people living. I think what Tool has suggested is that the parking spaces in the building are uncoupled from the rental units, right, or from the units, and so I think that saying that this project would have a negative impact on downtown parking, I don't think that I look at this project in that way. I think we have many more issues to solve for downtown parking, and to put this project, to have it sound as though this project is a big problem for downtown parking is, I don't think that that's realistic. I think there's many other things that are more problematic for downtown parking.
Right. Okay.
I hope that was clear enough. Sorry.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirk.
Yeah, it's great going after Cheryl because I can just keep saying, what she said. I said it well. So I agree exactly with what Cheryl said. And the only thing I'll add in the parking is that I actually would just go a little bit of a step further, that I think, this project actually seems like it's working really hard to try and actually offset and resolve part. Like, they're not providing the minimum, they're doing more than the minimum. And while the technology may be a little bit controversial and the jury's potentially out on that, I mean, there's a lot of other projects I suspect that will come to this board in the CBD that aren't going to have the option to do underground parking, or aren't going to have the option to add this level of parking. And the fact that they're doing it at what I understand generally is a great cost is a benefit. So that's all.
Good. Thank you. I-Ching?
Regarding the parking, I feel like we're jumping light years ahead from a very car dependent kind of community to this automated parking. It feels like a bat cave. You can just send your car in. But I really commend the applicants for that too, in looking at technology to help solve some of our big problems about land use. And it's innovative, it's costly, and I'm excited for where our community is going to go. And I acknowledge the trepidation that a lot of people have for the increase in parking and traffic in downtown. And I would urge people to look at the Tool design memo, and I appreciate their the counting, the sort of the numbers, the true numbers, the real numbers that they were thinking of, and the timing of it. And I think that would clear up a lot for a lot of people who are kind of a little fearful of the number of cars that are going to come into it. But also the bike portion of it is exciting too. And I wish that we saw a little bit more accommodations about where to park the bikes, and And I agree that we should have that condition about solving or just easing that pressure at the bike path. But I think that they definitely made reasonable provisions for all of that.
Okay, thank you. My turn. So to tell you the truth, the biggest concern I have about the traffic on this is what's happening on 10 Converse. It's just such a tight, difficult street. And I'm going to repeat what I said earlier is I think that's unique to this site, not to this project. I think whatever goes on that lot is going to have problems on 10 Converse. I think TUL has looked at it. I think there are reasonable ways forward to accommodate that. I am concerned about the pull-off or the drop-off zone, and I think TUL has suggested putting it further down 10 Converse and the current orientation of Converse. I don't know whether anyone's looked at reversing the flow of 10 Converse and seeing how that affects, but I think these are all solvable. I've forgotten already who picked up on the fact that TUL has suggested selling or renting some of the spaces. I think the fact that there are extra spaces that are above and beyond what's required in downtown actually provides the way of relieving some of the pressure from other projects because you'll have excess parking here. One of the things that came up in my discussion with the sustainability director a couple of days ago is that it's going to be difficult having plugins for electric vehicles in an automated system because you put your car in the elevator, it goes down, and there's no one down there to plug your car in. So I have a feeling, having looked at a lot of advertising for vehicles on TV lately for some reason, that electric vehicles are going to be a big thing. Yep. And in particular, knowing that these, to be honest, these units will be high-end units, and there are quite a number of luxury car companies which are deciding to go all electric. So I think there will be a large number of electric vehicles in this complex, and I want to ensure that they are probably going to be using facilities offsite, and I want to make sure that they are not creating a burden for whatever facilities we have in town. So that's something to speak about with the sustainability director. Other than that, I concur that we need to find a way of ensuring that the bike path is safe for all users, with the understanding that it is a sinuous path. It is not linear, as Cheryl pointed out. That will cause people to slow down. It will also cause people to wander off the path. So it may be that we just walk bikes there because it's just a crowded urban area. And that's just what you do because you personally don't want to hurt someone else. So I know this is a concern of people, but I think that other communities have dealt with this. There are bike trails everywhere which do go through crowded urban areas, and there are ways of dealing with that. So I would agree with the condition to try to make sure that we get this right. Okay, and I'm done. Thank you. Sally.
So one of the conditions that I think is really important to incorporate is this question of loading. And I think what I saw in the TUL report was the message that it's to be addressed. But it's such a big thing to address because you've got deliveries for the commercial, you've got deliveries for the residents, you've got moving in and moving out of the residents. And then you've got deliveries just related to the maintenance of the common areas, whatever that would be. And the discussion was about having the delivery, I'm not sure I heard the solution except to say that, well, if we do this, it will block Converse Street, which that's not a solution, it's simply a circumstance. So it's a really big condition actually about how loading, and it's not even just loading, it's also passenger drop off. And I know these blue boxes at the bottom were meant for, you're dropping a kid off or picking a kid up to go to karate or to take someone into town to go to the museum, whatever it is. That's a quick thing. It's not parking, but if you're loading and unloading, that can be more than quick. And so I really need to see how this is going to be addressed. And one question I had, I know we talked about Mount Vernon not having any loading and unloading because the police and fire station is there. But if you go a little bit more towards Town Hall, is there, on Mount Vernon, is there a spot that the select board might perhaps consider a designated loading unloading spot for this building that would get it off of Converse and not block Mount Vernon? So it really needs more work.
I'll just say the one thing that, just to put a clear point on it. So this is their proposed solution, is to move the pickup drop-off location to the southern side of Converse. So it's not a condition to be addressed. This is what they decided based upon their review of the site, is that they thought that the applicant was wrong in putting this here because of a potential backing up onto Mount Vernon, and their potential solution is to move it to the south side of Converse.
So these blue boxes represent two kinds of drop off and pickup. One could be quick. I'm meeting my friend, I'll pick you up at 3 and then off we go. And the other is loading and unloading, both in those blue boxes.
Yeah, and realistically, this is going to be probably a pickup location, potentially, for China Sky. That's the restaurant here. If just in practice. So the idea is that, this is still talking about the select board's jurisdiction here. So we could say that it's already been studied by the consultant, and they're saying this. So, but this is their potential solution.
Right, and so our condition would be something about the select board being satisfied that this will meet the needs of the town. Is that how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I think what would make the most sense is to reference this entire document at the very least. That is typically how usually the last memo and at the end of this memo it said that tool design is satisfied that the transportation related elements of the redevelopment have been accurately represented and requests no additional information pending the satisfaction of the town of Winchester to the recommendations listed above. So this is kind of like the way that many of these traffic memos are worded, or in this case, so that this is set up to be, if we agree with their proposed choices, then that we would just use this as a condition.
Okay, well, I guess as long as the select board is happy that the accommodations for drop off and pick up and loading and unloading for multiple purposes, commercial, common area unloading, and residential move in, move out, whatever, and deliveries. I mean, someone could have someone could have a couch delivered, these are the loading and unloading things that we need to be thinking about. And as long as the select board is satisfied that it's not going to cause a problem, being as they're the commissioners of the streets, then we would simply say that was our condition, that they need to be satisfied. Is that how that works?
That's correct. That is correct. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So I do think, for what it's worth, I think you're right to raise that that is an important challenge. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking at Tool's thing, I'm wondering how current deliveries don't completely block the street. Because it seems like they'd have to either take up all of the parking, and to be honest, looking at this reminds me of some of the tighter sections of, say, Boston, where you may have to use a smaller delivery vehicle, and you may have to park a block away in order to take your hand truck and deliver to the place. But I think it's
Well, I think it's a really good point, Dia, because twice I saw that like a really big delivery truck, you know, the long ones. I don't know
Mhm.
what they're called in trucking world. But it couldn't get out of Converse Place. It couldn't make the turn. And
No.
then when it finally did navigate the turn, it couldn't get out. And it was because the cars parked, you know, 14 inches too away from the curb and they blocked the road. So it's definitely needing attention.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
a big deal.
I think this is completely doable. I haven't traveled a lot in my life, but when I've gone to countries where they have plazas where they have to deliver in small vehicles because they can't get through I mean, there are ways to do
Yeah.
it. And so they just, you know, I think we can, traffic is usually solvable, I hope. Okay, I think we're done with traffic. Adequacy of utilities and other public services, wrap around to Cheryl.
Um, well, I think that we've learned from the applicant that there are certain aspects of the first floor of the building that are serving requirements for the building. So I think that has not been overlooked. I think in terms of the community, I think we've all, I think Philip Chen pointed out that that having screening be correctly scaled and sized for the mechanical equipment on the top of the building is one of the conditions that I think is important to moving forward in the design. It's a large enough footprint. I think that it is achievable in terms of minimizing the view of any kind of mechanical equipment. I'm kind of Brian, if you have any suggestions on what this utility piece is in terms of the regulations, I'm kind of grabbing it.
No, yeah, I'm glad you reached because you're actually talking more about impacts of 4 and 5. What we're talking about right now are adequacy of utilities and other public services. This has to do with what Assistant Town Engineer Brian Manter talked about earlier this evening, kind of basically saying that all of the issues that have that the engineering department raised with related to utilities and services have been addressed. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, but that's kind of the we're relying on engineering to do that, I guess, is really the short. So sorry.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was hoping. But I think, Brian, earlier you said, Mr. Manter, that you felt that your questions and concerns had been addressed by the applicant.
Correct. Yes, that the applicant's aware of the concerns and they are going to work to address those through the design phase or the further in the design. So that's the most critical part, is that they're aware of it, and I'm confident that we will be able to work through these issues.
Great. Check.
Jack, okay, Kurt.
Sorry.
I would say also, you know, check subject to the satisfaction of the engineering department's, you know, conditions that they're working with the applicant on. It may also just be worth noting, I thought the applicant's response to Ching's question on pursuing an all-electric building, you know, I don't know, I think that maybe fits under this bullet, but that's kind of just a nice thing to note too, just that this will be a very green building.
Okay, Ching.
Ditto. I don't really have much to add to that.
Okay. So the things I have are things that I think will come up with when our sustainability director, Ken Pruitt, comes next week, just to discuss what's going on. And so what I have are public services. It's a little fuzzy in my brain exactly what that encompasses, but certainly the ability to, we haven't talked about photovoltaic cells on the roof. I realize there are design issues with that, but ensuring that if there is a possibility that is made available. Also, again, I don't know how we deal with electric plug-in electric or power for electric vehicles, but that I think is the only other thing I have on my list of concerns. Sally?
I would have on my list of concerns, and I'm not sure that this falls under public services, but I don't think we've seen what provisions are being made, and this might be under a separate section, for fire trucks to be able to access the east and south sides of the building. So I don't want to solve that right now. I just want to put that on the table if that is under public services. The other thing I wanted to say was, I thought I read within the last 36 hours that there was a question with regards to this being an all-electric building as to whether the water heating would be electric. And if it wasn't, it was something about reducing the size of the, what's that huge 16-foot high room for? It's a transformer?
Or something.
Yeah. Yep. And that impacts the sustainability of the building, because if they heat it with natural gas, obviously we're making the building have a carbon impact. So I guess what I should say is that I want to make sure that emergency vehicles can get around all four sides of the building, and that might be addressed elsewhere in the code. And I want to make sure that they truly meet the commitment of it being a green building.
Just one thing that the sustainability director has already said specifically with the hot water that there's really no product out there to actually make the domestic hot water work for a building of this type. That's going to kind of get so some of that's going to get finalized tomorrow. But what they've committed to in writing is pursuing an all electric for the space heating, which is great. It's amazing. Yeah. But I just want to make clear that there's no regulations requiring any of this. So when we're talking about as relating to the regulations of how we're looking at this, all of this can only be looked at as benefits, meaning that they're not required to do any of this.
Right. Okay. But then I would also second the concern about how will plug-in vehicles get plugged in a robo garage? It's a big question for me.
Right. Can I comment on that quickly?
Yeah.
We do have an answer. It's something we reached out to one of the parking.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Sure. It's David Tabankin with Hassan Associates, the project architects. We have reached out to the one parking vendor that we've been dealing with to coordinate the garage layout to ask that question. And they do have, while the details aren't figured out in how they apply it directly to this design and how many spaces we get, they do have a way of accommodating that. Essentially, I believe when you pull the car in, you're on a tray, you plug into that tray, and when you go down to the basement, it's brought to some specific spaces at the perimeter of the garage that do have some electrical contact that accommodates electric parking. So it's something we need to dig into in the design phase, but we did ask the question, and there are ways of accommodating that. We don't know yet how many spaces could be accommodated to achieve that. But
and so, given that the building is going to last well into the era where there are no more gasoline-powered cars, we would address the need for more and more and more plug-in spaces as we go along, I guess. I mean, that's a question for your vendor.
Yeah, that's something we'll be talking to them about.
I just want to point out that while we seem to believe that electric vehicles are the vehicles of the future, there are large corporations which are betting on hydrogen. And so I think it's important that we realize that the technology is going to be changing over the next 20 or so years. And the mix, how we achieve carbon-free travel will not be what we think it is, I think. Just because I'm still waiting for my flying car I was promised in the 50s. So I'm sure there will be changes. I know hydrogen is a big deal for, I think, Toyota. So who knows what will happen.
Well, I thank you, David, for
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
drilling down with the guy in the robo garage guy.
I think similarly with regards to the hot water heating issue, once we have our MEP engineers on board, one of the key questions will be what's the possibility of changing out a gas hot water system in the future when the equipment is available. So that's something we would talk to them about.
And we have gas on the street, right? I mean, it's there. We don't have to like do giant pipelines, right? Brian? Brian?
Sorry,
Do either Brians know if there's already gas on the street?
I would imagine there is.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Let me look into that though.
It shouldn't be hard, but I just wanted to know.
Yeah, I think the key, what we will, and what I'm sure we'll hear from Ken next week is we want to future-proof this building as much as possible without locking them into a particular vision of the future. I think we've gone around for number 3. Now we get into the big one, I think, and that is we're moving to number 4, impacts on neighborhood character. Brian, you want to pop that up, please? I think this is the one that most of our visitors to the planning board are interested in, at least for the site plan or for the special permit. So we were looking at impacts on neighborhood character, including the extent to which building forms and materials are compatible with the prevailing scale and character of buildings in the neighborhood. Architectural features add visual character to the neighborhood. Patterns and proportions of windows are consistent. So I think we're going to take this all. I don't know that it makes sense to split this into A, B, and C, but simply why don't we go around and have everyone just take 4 in its entirety. And so Cheryl.
So I feel for a design concept, we've been shown something that very much addresses the neighborhood character, building form and materials. For concept design, we have heard, and I agree as an architect, that this design has been taken a lot farther than most concept designs would ever have made it. And I commend the design team, and I also believe that the reason that this has happened is because of the location of this project. And I feel that the materials are appropriate to the downtown. I also feel that the way that the building addresses many different aspects of the downtown as a village for a residential or program has been achieved, and I'm 100% behind it. I think that it needs to be a successful building in the downtown, and so I believe that has looked at patterns, proportions. I think it's also a contemporary residential building, and I think that it will be successful in our town with the design and the types of units that it's proposing. And I think that it's got an incredible design team with Haseen and Associates, and I think we should be really, we'll be really pleased with the outcome.
Okay, thank you. Kurt, you're up next.
Sure. So this is interesting because I'm not, like, design is definitely a little bit outside my expertise. So it's actually helpful to hear Cheryl's take, given her expertise. But I think in this one, I'm relying pretty heavily on Philip Chen in his report, and I think he addressed, a lot of these elements very specifically in his report, and was very, complimentary of the design. I think he felt as though the design did a lot to address a lot of what's in here in terms of being compatible and fitting into the character of the existing neighborhood, both, with the use of appropriate materials, appropriate design elements, with, the bays and the sort of like the faux Juliet balcony sort of looks and whatnot. I think, and my personal feelings, I agree with him. I think it is, consistent with its own modern spin. And I think Cheryl's right. You have to build a building that will be successful, and fit and actually be functional in today's world. And so I think they did a nice job making something functional and successful while still, reminiscent of, the history within downtown. So I think I generally defer to Philip Chen, who felt very strongly that it did, meet a lot of these criteria, and I feel comfortable that it does too. I actually, one last point, this does talk about, scale, and like the design elements of scale really is what Philip addressed, and how the scale was designed. The design basically like addressed scale by using design elements to bring the building down to street level. And I do think that was successful. I know Philip did as well. But I also think it's important, and I think this has been brought up before, to think about this building not only in the context of what's in downtown now, but what the zoning and the goal of residents is for downtown in the future, which is not a lot of one-story buildings. I think this is a specific region of downtown Winchester that's been identified as an area for greater density. So I think the future of this area is going to be bigger, taller structures. So I think this may seem like it doesn't, fit exactly with maybe the size of everything that's in downtown now, but I think it fits in the vision that's been approved by this town.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. Yi Ching.
I'll address the material first. I feel like that's a little bit easier, but I think that the choice of materials, the bricks, the granite, the copper looking metal, are really lovely, and match with what is existing. And I think that they will look very, hopefully after approval, look very formal, I think, and like with a lot of care. And I think the detailing especially is something that is very significantly different from a lot of these kinds of buildings that are being built all around the Boston region. And it really pays attention to its siting, and changes as you go around, and sort of highlights various parts of the town, facing the pond, facing Mount Vernon, to be a little bit more discreet, and to the pond side a little bit showier. And I think that virtuosity with architecture is very impressive. And I know the scale is what is really taken a lot of people aback. And I don't know how to, hide the elephant, or, the 3.0 FAR is going to be huge. It's a big building. And I think that they have approached it in a way that minimizes it, and makes it quite actually a nice building to look at. So, I think it's going to be out of scale with the existing, like Kurt said, and matching the future. And it will be uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people. So I think that is something that is negative, but the aspects that are beneficial, certainly I think that the design, the program, I think outweigh it, the scale by a lot. And I want to address the sort of contemporary look of it too. I think the current, architecture in town is very more traditional, and this has a very contemporary look, and that might not match with it. But I would argue that it is for the times. I don't think that we should be building like we built in 1910. This building is technologically really innovative, and it's going to be a fancy building. And I think rather than seeing it as something that's disappointing, I would hope that people see it in light of its actual visual. I think it's a good looking building, but also the fact that it showcases a community that is addressing the very difficult housing crisis that we're having. So I think that visual, or that kind of adding of that character to the town is really significant.
Okay, thank you, Ching. I'm up next, and I am going to follow the wisdom of I Ching's approach and talk about the materials and the design, and then talk to the scale at the end. So I think that if you look at downtown, there are certainly some particular buildings which stand out as having a design that really says, wow. And there are a number of other buildings which are buildings of their period, but I don't know how much they add to the architectural importance or interest in downtown. And one of the things that I saw once at a museum, and there was this giant neon sign that said, all art is contemporary. And I think in that very same sense, all architecture is contemporary. It's a meld of the old and the new, but it's done by people of now. And so we have to recognize that, art or architecture, like art, progresses. And so I think that this building has a richness of detail. It has a lot of visual character. I think the way that the four different sides are handled is interesting. It's not a boring building. It's a building which I think does add visual character. And I don't think it adds it in a way where you stop and you say, oh my God, that's hideous. I think it adds a visual character because there's a richness to detail, and because you will look at it and you will want to keep looking at it and look at it from different angles. And so I think it's very successful in that sense. The materials, it's a brick building. Personally, I know a lot of people love brick buildings. I come from the town, Detroit, where everyone's house is made of brick. So for me, brick is an ordinary material, perhaps. I really like the look of different colored clapboard houses in New England. I find it a breath of fresh air. But I understand that people see the brick as an important part of the fabric of downtown. And so I think it fits in that way. So I think the big question is scale and character. And so I think character I've addressed. It is different, but I think it's well designed. Scale is a different beast altogether. And I think that this is one of those areas where the CBD zoning looks to the past and the future at the same time, and it's hard to determine what it means. So for instance, in this area, by special permit, not even going to a PUD, you can get up to 59 feet in height. And so this area was designated as an area which was going to take a large building. And if the zoning itself refers to the possibility of a large building, then the question is, what does the words prevailing scale mean? And it can't simply mean the scale before you built the buildings that were allowed to be there. And I think the problem here is that this is the first large building that we're contemplating in downtown since forever. And perhaps had Waterfield and the lot gone forward on time, then we would have been more accustomed to seeing a new 4-story building. This is a shock to what we see here now, but I don't think it's out of scale with what was proposed by the zoning. And I know, I don't recall exactly the presentations made to town meeting those many years ago in 2015 when the zoning was passed, but this scale of building was contemplated. And so, as I Ching pointed out, when we compare this to the existing scale of the buildings, then yes, it is larger, but it's not out of scale with what the zoning is intended to accomplish. And so, to be honest, I think it is a little big, but I think it's still within what the zoning called for. And I think that I have to go with that vision of the zoning. I think we will be seeing from the Concom whether they feel that there is a view shed issue. I think it would be I would like to see the building narrower to accommodate the bike path. But other than that, those are my thoughts. Sally?
So I will follow suit and take things in order of forms, materials, scale, and character. So the form of the building, I want to say, first of all, that I actually really love it when I see a contemporary interpretation of a traditional architectural form. I think it's a moment of genius in the field of architecture when you can do that. And this building is getting there. I think it's come a long way since it was first presented to the town in 2019. But I stand by something that I said before that wasn't agreed with by the designers, and I'm sorry, but there remains very large, looming, sheer 3-story faces. This prescription of the tripartite building, it's a difficult thing to achieve when you've decided that every facade of the building is going to be different. But on almost every facade, we have a huge 3-story vertical element that contributes to, it doesn't mitigate the height of the building. I would really like the height of this building to come down to 4 stories. And in doing that, it would more successfully be able to translate the tripartite character of the other buildings, and it would be able to more successfully manage the cornice line as it relates to the rest of the town. And all of that is to say that the building form, to me, needs work. I think the materials are potentially very cool. I'm not a big fan of the top floor in terms of form, and the jury's out on materials because I feel the form of the top floor is very chaotic and obtrusive, and it needs work, frankly. The scale of the building, I do not feel that it is a good fit with our town. I think that what we're working with, the bones of the town that we're working with, are some really obvious and beloved historic structures. And this building, I do not feel that it honors and respects their place in the community. Its character could do so if it was a story smaller, and if some of those large 3-story faces were reduced, and if there was more emphasis on cornice lines carrying the whole thing through. I realize we're getting into design, but form and scale and character are about design. And so I don't concur with my fellow board members that it is primarily compatible with the prevailing scale and character. I feel that there's still work to be done on the form and the scale and the mitigation of height. And I don't think that the 5th floor, well, if it would come down to the 4th floor, that would be a start. And I don't think that the construction of the boxy dormer extrusions is there yet for honoring the character of the town. I know, yeah, I think that I'll just leave it at that for now.
Okay, thank you. We have miraculously arrived at exactly 9 o'clock or close enough. And I know that we managed to get through a whole round on number 4. So I think this would be a good point to continue the meeting, the hearing, to time certain, which would be next Tuesday. Unless the board wants, I know we do have an executive session slated for 9 o'clock. And I hope that we can finish that. We do need to finish that. We owe that to our town planner. We've dragged this out for several weeks, months, years, however long it's been. So does the board concur that we should continue this to next week and move into our executive session? And I see, I'm sorry, I have to look at everyone, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. So I see Sally says yes, Kurt, Cheryl, yep, and I Ching, where'd you go? There you are. Okay. So I would, first of all, thank you all very much for being with us. I'd like to thank those Brian Manter, town engineer, for making himself available, Mina Markarius, and Philip Chen, as well as Ed Miliori. And I would welcome, and of course, everyone who came in from Winchester residents to listen in. We really do appreciate your input. We are still getting input from you, and we will continue to read it. We do not ignore it. So I would appreciate a motion to continue this hearing until, shall we call it 7 o'clock on Tuesday, to give us the maximum time to finish. We really do need to get this done before the election, which is next Saturday, or I should say the following Saturday on the 19th. So continue until, what is next Tuesday? Let's see, let's look, open up the calendar here. It would be Tuesday, the 15th at 7 p.m. And if
Yeah, can I ask a question about getting ready for next Tuesday?
Yeah, sure.
So a lot of conditions flew through the conversation this evening. And is it possible for them to be documented and given to us before the next meeting, so that we are mindful of those as we move to the end of the second meeting?
That is the goal, for sure, to get that to you as soon as possible to help you organize your thoughts.
Yeah, good.
I think that the idea would probably to get them into a reasonable form, but perhaps not the exact final form, because I think we definitely will be going through legal to ensure that all of our I's and T's are crossed. So I would expect some form of it, hopefully by the end of the week, Brian.
Even an outline, so that we don't, forget.
We have Nancy here to remind us, of course.
We
Nancy
do.
So,
so can I just put a point on that? So you're saying then, Diab, that we are going to have draft conditions that we can review as well as legal is reviewing before our next meeting?
So I think the goal is based upon tonight. It's there were concerns that were raised and then possible conditions that would be able to mitigate those concerns. What would happen is that some of them seemed to be agreed upon by the board. Others would clearly need to be voted on by the board. So the idea is to that, and that my job here is to organize those votes when they're needed, when there was clearly not a kind of a consensus on the mitigating effects. Does that make sense?
I'm just trying to understand what needs to be vetted or rewritten by legal.
Sure.
To what deadline, if we're going to have a vote next week?
Right. So
very good question. Thank you.
What has happened on previous decisions, basically it's subject to the review of town council, and then you give the chair or whoever the planning board designates. Typically it's the chair or the chair and one more person. You would designate them to finalize the wording, but the votes would still be, the votes. So for instance, Sally suggested a mitigating effect would be to take a floor off. There will probably be a vote on that. Does that make sense?
Brian,
Yes.
Brian, I'll also add that typically you and I, to the extent we can coordinate on the draft that you all see next week, we'll do that. So there's a lot of different things that go on, but ideally, Brian and I will try to work through some of the conditions. So our review is pretty limited afterwards, ideally.
So Mina, is that to say that we have to get it right going into the meeting on the 15th?
No, I'm not saying anything different than Brian just said in terms of it's subject to sort of a final review, but just to assure you that this isn't, especially since I've been sitting through these last two meetings, the goal is not to have something come back and for us to say, what? Wait a second, that's not a condition we can say or anything like that. It's
right.
Sort of we understand the conditions, and Brian and I will work together throughout the week. Brian, I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, we will help Brian to the extent we can during the week, I guess is the point, to get it there. So.
Yeah, I think that what's key is that the board expresses clearly what its desire is, that the condition, the result, what results from the condition, and so that the spirit of what the board wants is known. And then at that point, when we come to a vote next week, if it goes that way and we say we would like, that's as Brian pointed out, you designate someone on the board to follow through and make sure that the spirit of what the board intends is in those conditions. And so I think that would be sufficient legally. And Mina will probably tell me one way or the other if I'm wrong or right.
I am nodding in agreement. So yes, you're right, Dia.
Oh, you're nodding. I can't see you.
I know, I'm sorry. There's a lot of people.
Okay. So I hope that answers that resolves those concerns. And if it does, I would welcome a motion to continue this meeting at 7 a.m. on March.
Not a.m.
Not a.m. Yeah.
Ixnay on the a.m.
You are quite right about that. On 7 p.m. on March the 15th. Is that the Ides of March?
It is.
I don't know.
Apparently there are two Ides or something. I forget. Okay, so March the 15th at 7 p.m. For all you.
So moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call vote, please. Cheryl.
Aye.
I Ching. Kurt.
Aye.
Sally.
Aye.
And Diab says aye as well. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate your attention. As I mentioned, thank you to everyone who has come by to view the proceedings. I understand this is a very important project for the town, and I hope we are doing right by the town. So at this point, we will be moving into executive session. We will not be coming out of executive session. So as far as public parts of this, this is the end of the public portion of tonight's meeting. So we expect all of you to go off and do something more interesting, but we will continue. So we will need a roll call vote to enter executive session for purposes of personnel purposes. Kurt,
Aye.
I Ching,
Aye.
Cheryl,
Aye.
Sally,
Aye.
and Diab says aye as well. At this point, Brian will kick all of you other people out, and we will turn off recording.